The Black Ship Side Story, Barony of Screaming Forests, Day 4, Part 3. Wyatt stood up and walked over to Rachel. Looking into her eyes, he said, "I apologize for any offense I might have caused, Lady Rachel. Her Highness and I both feel that we owe you an explanation." Rachel was about to say that everything was fine and no offense had been caused, but then she saw the princess looking straight at her with her finger to her lips, and she stayed silent as Wyatt continued. "Some weeks ago, I was just a commoner hauling a container full of compost through space when I came across a ship that was under attack. It was the Royal Yacht. With as much luck as skill, I managed to drive the attacker off. In the process, I saved Her Highness Princess Clara Astor. As a result, she was kind enough to permit me to address her simply as Clara, and her friend and bodyguard, Lady Cynthia Winfield, also permitted me to address her by her first name rather than her title. Since then, various events have caused the three of us to become friends, which I am sure feels as strange to them as it does to me. But the result is that I sometimes forget my manners and my place." Cynthia chose that moment to add, "Worse, Her Highness sometimes forgets her position and throws cushions at her friends." Clara, who had been going to say something, just giggled. Wyatt smiled, continuing, "So now you know the worst thing about us, we do not know how to properly behave." This caused Clara to switch from giggling to laughter, and even Cynthia joined in as Wyatt continued. "I'm sorry I questioned your outfit. I know how horrible it must have been on that ship. I was wrong to question you about it, especially as my friends were only doing their bit to try and help you deal with that experience." This time Rachel could not help herself and said, "It is quite all right, my lord. You have no need to apologize. I understand the confusion." Again she saw a frown on Wyatt's face and asked, "Is there something wrong, my lord? Have I offended you in any way?" This made Clara laugh again, and Cynthia joined in, but not before Cynthia said, "Go ahead, Wyatt. You'll say it anyway, so you might as well do so now." Wyatt sighed. Turning to Rachel, he said, "Look, I hate being called my lord, okay? I was born and raised as a commoner. I'm just not comfortable with it. I was a warrant officer, and I'm now a lieutenant commodore. I can cope with being addressed as sir, but I would be much happier if you simply called me Wyatt, except if we are in a situation where you have to use my title, okay?" Rachel looked at him, seeing an honest expression on his face despite the odd eyes, and said, "Only if in turn you treat me in the same way and address me as Rachel. If that is okay with you, Wyatt." Wyatt smiled again. "Thank you, Rachel. Now, in further good news, Her Majesty has invited us to join her and Lady Cynthia for dinner." Cynthia turned to Clara. "You did what?" she said, barely keeping her voice from shouting. Now Wyatt started to laugh while Clara smiled innocently. It took a few minutes for the situation to calm down. Still, in the end, Clara told Cynthia that they were having a working dinner, and Cynthia begrudgingly admitted that Clara's stateroom was probably the most secure room in the ship. Clara told Rachel about the deal involving Hago and Wyatt's role, and Wyatt gave a summary of the situation so far. "So, I have a town where there is some food and drinkable water, but the kitchens are all in need of being replaced. The sewage plant sort of works, but needs repairs to make all the bits function properly. My single electrical turbine really needs to be replaced urgently, or we won't have any power. There might be a way to make biodiesel, but we have no one who knows how to run the plant." The heaviness in his voice was more than evident. "There's also a brewery, and according to the list of people, I do have some people who should know how to make it work, but again, I don't want to use it as it will probably take more power than we have. I have quite a lot of machinery for timber harvesting, but it needs repairs and I need spare parts. And a generator. Also, there are no saws to cut it up. Some Drazon and other dangerous animals are running around, but I don't know where. There are farms, but I need a lot of expensive farm machinery and I don't have enough farm animals. Well, except for chickens. I have lots of chickens. I hope you like eggs. Oh, and I have 3 fishing boats, but not much fuel." He chuckled. "But I do have lots of good people. Everyone so far has been working really hard. I also have plenty of homes where people could move into tomorrow, except their kitchens are all either dead or dying." Rachel thought about this for a few minutes, and as she did, Clara interrupted. "Wyatt, did you say that the turbines were on their last legs and needed to be replaced?" Wyatt sighed before replying, "Yes, Clara. There were originally 4 turbines and some power management computer that kept everything running. Now we have a single turbine that is somehow still going, but the lubrication has to be topped up, by hand, every few days, and like many or even most of the mechanical things, it's dying." Clara picked up her datapad and looked at something on it before asking, "And how big are these turbines?" Wyatt shrugged. "I don't know, I haven't yet seen them, but I do have model names, numbers, and specifications. They can't be huge. The pipes into them are supposed to be small." Clara looked at him, shaking her head before saying, "And did it not occur to you that we could probably manufacture such items on board the Noir Navio?" Wyatt looked at her as if she had suddenly grown 3 heads. "Clara, you can't do that. The Noir Navio needs its repairs. You cannot delay those just to make some turbines for me." Clara looked at him, then talking slowly, she said, "Wyatt, the outer hull is already repaired. Jincho and our technicians are focusing on internals, which will consume more time than physical resources. Now, I don't know what facilities you would need to make new turbines, but a number of the fabricators are not currently in use. Maybe one or more of them could build you your new turbines. After dinner, go and see the chief engineer, Lupin Lusanto. Ask him if it can be done, and if he says yes, tell him to do so as a secondary priority to the ship's repairs. Electricity is critical in your getting your barony up and running and keeping its people alive. I won't be accused of rescuing people, only to go off and leave them to die on a planet due to my lack of support. Oh, and speaking of support, here is a list of excess equipment and supplies taken from the Gallant Venture and the other captured ships. I've split it up by group, so there's medical, food, engineering, and so forth." Clara looked up to see his surprised face. "Please, Wyatt, don't give me that look. I have already ensured the means to restock our supplies, and where possible I've stored spares. This is just what's left over. There's plenty of food, simple rations in the majority. If I can give Felicity any praise, is that she was sensible enough to replenish their supplies when meeting with House Ferentis, as did we. There are also a lot of medical supplies, everything from bandages to med pods. When Jincho organized the stripping of those ships, he took my words literally when I said if it could safely be removed, then they would be mine. Diligent, is he not?" Looking at Rachel, who was quietly sitting at the table, Clara said, "I'm sending you a copy as well. Look up the items and price them. List them as captured trophies salvaged from enemy combat vessels. If our Baron finds a use for them on Hago, class them as a charitable donation on his part for tax purposes. Don't forget everything donated to aid the Hago reconstruction for the next year is worth double when it's come to claiming for tax purposes." Rachel, who was still in awe at sitting opposite Princess Clara, replied, "Yes, my princess." Rachel was looking down the lists of items on the borrowed datapad that Wyatt had already sent her, and noticed an expensive package. Wyatt had listed 1,600 datapads with a price of 3,200,000 credits. Looking up at Wyatt, she said, "Excuse me?" asking Wyatt, "But why so many datapads, and why 2,000 credits each?" Wyatt turned to Rachel, taking out his own datapad. "I bought this on Matcha, the only thing I've bought for myself with my reward credits so far, other than my armor. I wanted something good, better than the cheap one I already had. This gives the best performance and capabilities for the money. I want every man, woman, and child in Newtown to have one. It's one decent thing they can start off with. It cost me 2,000 credits, so I just added a few spares, because someone always drops one down the toilet or something, and made it 3,200,000. Rachel put her head in her hands, shaking it, and Clara laughed. Wyatt looked bemused, saying, "But 1,600 datapads at 2,000 credits is 3,200,000. I'm not a genius, but I can do basic maths." Rachel looked over at Clara, asking, "May I tell him, please, my princess?" Clara, still giggling, nodded twice. "So," Rachel started to say, "when you buy large quantities of items, it's called buying in bulk. You can usually get a discount. But when you buy very large quantities, you can often go straight to the manufacturer. They give you a trade price so that you can make a profit on the items. But trade prices are often negotiable. These are fairly expensive datapads. A shop might order 100 or fewer at a time. They would get at least a 30% discount. I suspect ordering 1,600 will get you as much as a 50% reduction. They might even sweeten the deal, especially if you contact 2 or 3 rival manufacturers. And finally, you paid the commoner's price. You just walked into a shop and paid the price on display, didn't you?" Wyatt was confused, saying, "Of course. You have the credits for it. You can buy it. Simple, right?" Rachel sighed, looking at Clara as she said, "Only on essential items are commoners charged a fair price. On luxury items, commoners pay at least double the noble's price, sometimes more." Wyatt was stunned. Finally, he said, "But that's ridiculous." Clara looked at her friend, deciding to tell him the truth. "Why do you think we get rebellions?" Occasionally, commoners realize what's going on. Then they talk to their friends, their families, and compare notes. And well, then things can get really bad, especially if the nobles don't listen. How much markup? That's the difference between the cost and the price in the shops that the commoners pay is down to the local lord. But typically, there's a fourfold price difference on everything, except essential things like food. But luxury foods might charge even more. Clara continued, "This is something you and General Swallowtail need to be aware of and decide how to manage. A lot of discretion is given to local rulers, so whilst a fourfold price increase is not uncommon, it might be only a 30% increase for essential items because shopkeepers have to have an income too, or it might be considerably higher for items where you don't want a commoner to have access, such as knighthoods. Can you imagine if every commoner could just become a knight? But it's not all bad news. We also keep food prices as low as possible, medicine and healthcare as well, along with electricity and fuel. All are kept at a low cost because those things are essential." Wyatt looked at his friend and asked, "Clara, do I have to charge these prices?" Clara looked embarrassed as she said, "I'm afraid so, Wyatt. It is a rule. The law says that for a commoner to buy any luxury item, they must agree to pay the market price. Not even I or my brother the prince can change that law without the approval of the Council of Nobles." Rachel coughed, interrupting Clara. "Excuse me, my princess, but that's not quite accurate. A noble must indeed ensure that all luxury items are charged at market price. But it is also true that any noble may gift any item in their possession to whomever they please, I believe," she went on, emphasizing her next words. "Baron Staples said he wanted to give the commoners data pads. Was that not correct, Wyatt?" Wyatt looked at Rachel as he suddenly realized what she had just told them, saying, "That is what I said I wish to do." Rachel continued, "So that presents no problem. No one will object if a generous lord gives out a gift, especially not for such a trifling amount. Also, thanks to House Astor's and House Ferentis's generous offer, there would be no sales taxes to pay. So you are more likely to be looking at between 400 and 500 credits per unit. Perhaps if Her Highness is willing, we might get these things for even less." Clara looked at her across the table, her eyes holding a glint of appreciation and recognition. "What did you have in mind, Rachel?" she asked cautiously. Rachel looked back. "Well, my princess, it is said by some that no publicity is bad publicity, although, as an accountant, I would prefer to say that no good publicity is ever unwelcome. What if we could get the media companies interested, better yet, a single company with exclusive access? What is happening here? Your victory over the Drazen, the vanquishing of the Duke's forces, and the restoration of an entire planet from anarchy back to the Principality is going to attract a lot of attention. Perhaps a few kind words from yourself, for more generous donors, or from Baron Staples, for those who are not quite so generous, might get even healthier discounts or even donations coming in. This would make Wyatt's money go further and last longer." Clara beamed her smile, almost lighting up the room. "I like it, not just because it will help Wyatt, but more importantly, because every time it comes on a screen, it will be another turn of the screw in my uncle's coffin. There was a Ferentis news company that covered the victory. Their newscasters were commoners. I don't think anyone on Hago would object to their being on planet. Wyatt, you can ask your new friend, General Swallowtail, but regular coverage might bring in donations and even technical experts, even if it were just for short periods as consultants." Wyatt asked, "Are you sure, Clara? You don't normally seek publicity." Clara nodded. "You are correct, Wyatt, for obvious reasons, but this won't be about me. This will be about a marvelous project, helping the victims and survivors of a large-scale Drazan incursion, and it won't just be me they will interview. You, my dear Wyatt, are going to be a star. Don't worry, I will make sure we only answer questions that we want to answer. Did you know you have already had donations from that short news item? People from all over the Principality donated. They contacted the news company, who in turn set up a charitable account to allow people to donate. I've got the account details here." She watched Wyatt's face as she passed over the data pad. Wyatt was ready this time. He could see the smile on her face, but when he saw the number on the pad, he reached for a glass of sweet grape juice and drank it in almost a single gulp. 67,408,9,532 credits. He paused for a moment, feeling lightheaded, but the absurd number lacked the impact it had on him before. Then he looked at Clara. "Who would donate so much?" he asked. Clara replied, "Well over 3 million people, mostly commoners and a few lesser and minor nobles. The largest donation was 1,000 credits, the smallest 2 credits, and all of that with no official donation system set up and just a 5-minute news item." Wyatt was stunned. "People really care?" That was all he said. Clara looked at him, surprised. "Yes, Wyatt, people care. You have given them a huge victory against a great monster, and these were the people who did not just send money to an already set-up account. They made calls and sent emails to the news company demanding to know where to send the money. If we launch an official campaign, a charity they can donate to, and I can persuade that news company to send a team to cover it, I think we can raise plenty of resources. House Ferentis has said they will pay for some major items and infrastructure on Hago, but for Tornell and yourself, Wyatt, you need a lot more. House Ferentis will be paying out billions of credits, and it's barely going to make a dent in what's needed in the long term. You need to speak with Tornell, come to an agreement on how to split any money coming in, and I suggest Rachel here administers it." Clara looked again at Rachel before continuing. "This places a potentially huge responsibility on you, Rachel. I am sure you can be trusted with the money, but just in case you are tempted by vast sums, Wyatt here will tell you what will happen to you if you disappoint us. Whilst I do not expect this to occur, it's only fair you get the same warning as everyone else." Rachel looked at Wyatt, who turned to her and said, "You are a minor exiled noble. On a planet with all sorts of dangers, you would simply disappear. It would give me no pleasure. It would just happen. Do you believe me?" Rachel looked into his eyes. She remembered the scenes from the gallant venture, how he had so casually shot Casimir Caiston, and she felt her whole body turn to ice. There was absolutely no doubt in her mind that this man, who had been laughing and joking and trying to put her at her ease only a few minutes before, was now absolutely serious. Rachel licked her lips where they had suddenly gone dry and quietly said, "Yes, I believe you." Then suddenly Clara said, "Let me tell you something about my knight banneret, your Baron. He has the soul of a true knight. He will defend the innocent with his own life, but strike down the guilty without a hint of regret or mercy, and he looks after those he leads. Do your job as best you can, and he will ensure you get rewarded, even arguing with his superiors to ensure it." Clara lowered her voice to barely a whisper. "He is my friend, and I'm incredibly grateful for that friendship." Lady Cynthia rested her hand on Clara's shoulder, and she too said, "He is our friend." Wyatt said nothing, but turned bright red in embarrassment at the compliments, yet his smile was vast and sincere. Rachel, in turn, replied to Clara, "I understand, my princess. I promise I won't let any of you down." "But what do you need me to do?" Clara gestured to Wyatt to reply, the pink in his face now fading as confidence took over. Wyatt said, "I thought I just needed you to run the economy of the barony, my barony, but I think I will need you to also supervise the handing out of any money from this charity. Don't just give the money out. Use it for essentials to save people's lives and to help people with work." He paused for a moment, then nodded to himself. "I think the word I am looking for is invest." Wyatt looked across at Clara, who gave the smallest nod of her head to indicate he had the right idea, so he continued. "You put money into a new business or rebuilding an existing business, they pay that money back from their profits, then it can be used again." Rachel interrupted. "So we use the money to save lives, but also, like a bank, we lend it out to businesses that need help. How much interest do I charge on these loans, and how do I decide if money is really going to save a life?" Wyatt looked confused. "I'm sorry, what's interest?" Clara just giggled, but gestured for Rachel to clarify. So Rachel went on. "Interest is the amount of money a bank would charge you for a loan. To keep things simple, say you borrowed 1,000 credits from the bank for 1 year at 10% interest. Then at the end of the year, you would have to pay the bank back the original 1,000 credits plus a further 100 credits in interest." Wyatt looked at her and simply said, "No interest, we take 10% of any profits each year until the money is paid back, but not a credit more. If you leave people with more money in their pockets, they will work harder because they can see its value. As for saving lives, I suspect this will mean buying medical supplies and maybe food where it's needed, but also, if we can attract one, paying for a real doctor. We have quite a lot of medical technicians and nurses, even vets, but no doctors. No noble doctor wished to stay and help. Wyatt sighed before saying, I can't really blame them for that. Rachel asked, And the Barony, what do I need to do there? Wyatt held up his hands in resignation, saying, I honestly don't know. Clara said I should barter with General Swallowtail and the residents of Hago until they have money to spend, but I'd like to give my people some money of their own, even if it's not much, so they can order the things they want. I can provide the essentials, but I can't turn their houses into homes for them. Clara interrupted the conversation, saying simply, Dinner is about to be served. As Wyatt and Rachel watched, servants came in and brought out a small circular dining table and 4 chairs, setting the table with a cloth, placemats, cutlery, and glasses with military precision. Finally, with the table set, they each stood behind one of the chairs waiting for Clara and her guests to sit. With everybody seated, the servant in charge filled their glasses with chilled, slightly sparkling water, and 4 bowls of soup were brought in. A small white bread roll and butter accompanied each bowl. The bowls contained a rich, thick orange soup. On top, small cubes of toasted bread and slivers of bacon floated. Wyatt had no idea what the soup was, but it smelt delicious. They all waited for Cynthia to take the first taste, and once she had given a nod of approval to the waiting staff, they left, and the conversation continued, though now it was as much about the food, with Wyatt, almost drooling, asking Clara, What is this? Clara said, I think it's roasted tomato and pumpkin with some bacon. There's also the crispy bacon with the croutons on top. Wyatt nodded, taking a slurp and allowing himself to savor the flavors. He had always enjoyed good food, and he had to admit that serving his princess certainly gave him the opportunity to try dishes he had never tasted before. A soft moan escaped his throat as he went for another spoonful. Rachel, who had relaxed a little now that the food was served, suddenly sat upright and said, Souvenirs! Causing everyone to stare at her. Embarrassed, she said, I was thinking about what Wyatt said, about wanting some money to give to people, and what this victory over the Drazan will mean to the principality. But also you said House Ferentis will be sending ships full of things to do big infrastructure projects. That means those ships will be leaving empty. What if instead of leaving empty, they could be leaving full of souvenirs? Wyatt thought of his own home, of things his family had found or brought to remind them of trips or special occasions. Rachel might have a point. Looking across at Clara and Cynthia, he could see both had thoughtful expressions on their faces, but neither was making fun of the idea. Rachel took this as a sign to continue. I don't know what you could do, but it needs to be small and fairly low cost, and you need to make a lot of them. Sell them to the ship captains at half price, say 10 credits each. They have the issue of finding a market for them and selling for 20 credits. It would need to be cheap and quick to produce, and you want to number them. People are always happy to pay more if they think there are only a limited number, even if the number is huge like 10 million. Cynthia spoke up. Rachel's idea has merit, and she is right. This is something people will want to remember, but you need to find something you can reproduce quickly and in quantity. You have probably only a few months to cash in on the idea before it becomes old news and people lose interest. Wyatt was still mulling over the idea when the servant removed his empty soup bowl and replaced it with a green salad, which he quickly devoured. As the servants brought out the next course of asparagus wrapped in crispy bacon and filled a new glass with a light white wine, he slowly said, The burnt trees. Eyes turned to him. When we burnt the Drazan on Hago, a lot of trees were burnt, not completely, but enough to make them useless for regular timber. We could rip them up, saw them into plaques, a few seconds of sanding to smooth out the top and bottom surface, and a few seconds under a laser to engrave some text and a serial number. He ran the numbers through in his head. They would need saws, of course, and really he wanted small trees so they could just slice off sections from the trunk. But he thought if they kept the sections of trunk small, a competent woodsman could, perhaps, produce 10 slices in a minute if they were only between 8 and 12 centimeters in diameter. He had 30 woodsmen, so 10 minutes' work would give him 3,000 rough-cut wooden plaques. If he asked them to do that twice an hour for 8 hours, that would give him 48,000 per day. He looked over at Clara, asking, How long do you think it will take for House Ferentis to start sending supply ships? Clara thought for a while, whilst savoring the asparagus. Finally, she said, The emergency supplies will have already departed, but the majority of the supplies and personnel will likely take some 2 to 3 weeks to assemble. Then the travel time to get to Hago. You have probably got about 4 weeks as a minimum. Wyatt thought to himself, if I have time, if I'm right about how long everything takes, if I can get the equipment, it's possible. But there was still the problem of what to put on the plaque. When they finished the asparagus, the servants cleared away the white wine as well. Now they brought a new glass, and red wine was served, as the servants brought out a huge metal tray on which was placed a lot of different grilled meats. Wyatt had had a mixed grill before, but always it was with simple, cheap cuts. Here there were prime cuts of a number of meats, several sauces, mushrooms, onion rings, French fries, tomatoes, and many different vegetable dishes. Rachel looked at the feast in front of her and said, "I can't eat all of this, I'll explode." Clara giggled and said, "That's fine. Just choose the bits you want. But do leave room for dessert. That's the best bit of the meal." Rachel decided that she would like to try everything, so she chose the smallest pieces of meat and equally small quantities of the vegetables. It still put a lot on her plate, but it was manageable. Wyatt and Clara both filled their plates, and she was amazed to see the quantities that Cynthia was able to eat. Then she realized that Cynthia, as Clara's bodyguard and a Winfield, was probably packed full of enhancements that would all require energy, thus the large portions. She was glad she had tried everything when the remains were taken away, as everything had been amazing. Once again, the wine glasses were replaced, this time with a chilled, light, sparkling wine. As a tray of desserts were placed on the table, there were individual chocolate and raspberry cupcakes and little lemon tarts, a bowl of fresh fruit salad, a pavlova, and a strawberry gâteau. This time, no comments were made as everyone chose something they liked the look of, and then a second and a third. Even Rachel could not resist a third helping, though she did keep the portion size down. At the end of their dinner, the table was cleared, and they returned to the comfortable chairs to continue their discussion. Wyatt had sent a long list of items that he needed to get for the residents of Newtown, and as Rachel went down the list, he explained what his notes meant. GS meant he expected to get the items from General Swallowtail, but he needed her to get a commercial price for the equivalent. Some things he had marked as urgent, whilst others were listed as when possible. She noticed that the data pads had been marked as one of the most important things, as had tractors and certain spare parts. Other items like the harvesters were important but not needed immediately. Wyatt explained that they had about 3 months before the first crops requiring a combine harvester were ready. As she looked down at the list, she realized just how much equipment and heavy machinery he needed. An idea began to take hold, and she asked Wyatt, "Why not build some of these things under license?" Of course, Wyatt had no idea what she was talking about, so Rachel explained, "A lot of these companies build their products on multiple planets. They only actually own a single factory, but they let other factories produce their products. They supply the designs and instructions to produce and assemble everything, and then you pay a fee each time you sell one of their items." Wyatt really wasn't sure about this, saying, "I don't think we have the factory space, and I already need to build a new sawmill building. I think if I built any other large structures, I would rapidly run out of funds." But then he thought for a minute and added, "But maybe the general might be interested. He wants to get away from most of the military things and build civilian items instead. I think what I want to do is make sure I have enough food for my people, sell any spare food locally, and produce high-quality wooden items for sale off-world. I think that is where the money for Newtown will come from, though maybe we can build wooden buildings as well, giant kits that we will be able to load onto the train line when it eventually arrives." He thought for a few minutes. "What we really need right now are a couple of large shuttles without the railway. Getting anything to or from the nearest spaceport or anywhere else requires long trips on not very good roads." He looked over towards Clara. "Could I borrow?" Clara didn't even give him the chance to finish before she said, "No, you may not borrow a couple of Principality shuttles, at least not for being glorified delivery trucks, not to mention you haven't got any pilots in those staying on Hago." She pursed her lips and tapped her chin, thinking for a moment before saying, "There are some Drazen shuttles. Those are huge. There are also some guild pilots and mining pilots among the civilians who will be leaving on the first ship going to civilized space." Wyatt was confused. "I thought you gave all the Drazen stuff to House Forentis." Also, I thought the technician said we could not get them re-rigged for our pilots to fly them. Clara turned to him and said, "No, the technician said there wasn't time to convert Drazan vessels for our pilots to use for the battle. Not that it wasn't possible. If you can get a pair of civilian pilots to fly them, I'll get you a pair of Drazan shuttles." Wyatt looked at her. "How am I supposed to persuade a couple of pilots to fly Drazan shuttles as delivery trucks?" he asked. Clara looked at Wyatt as if he were an idiot. "You hire them, Wyatt. Offer them 1,000 credits a month, free food and accommodation. I'm sure you will get at least a couple of pilots to choose from. And if you offer them a bonus, they should be able to train a couple of your people. Ask them if any of your people would like to train to be a shuttle pilot. They are mostly young and all are fit and healthy. I expect you can find a few who might like to try. I'll even make you a deal. Find your pilots and I will let you have Jincho for 2 days along with any of the new Yikanti technicians he can persuade to help." Rachel had no idea what they were talking about, so she said, "Excuse me, my princess, but can I ask, who is this Jincho and why would you loan him to Wyatt?" Clara had forgotten for a moment that Rachel was even in the room, and of course had no idea who Jincho was, turned to her and said, "Jincho is a very clever, very strange Yikanti who insults almost everyone he sees, but who is an absolute genius at making machinery and computers work. If he cannot work out in 2 days how to let a human fly a Drazan shuttle, I will be very surprised. In fact, I would not be surprised if he already had plans for how to do just that, but I'll lend him to Wyatt for 2 days just so he will stop annoying Cynthia. Tomorrow morning, Wyatt can introduce you to Galt Tirum, who can get you communications access so you can do your research. For now, I suggest Cynthia return you to your quarters." Rachel bowed to Clara and said, "I thank my princess for her time and a wonderful dinner." And then she followed Cynthia back to her room. Wyatt looked at Clara. "Just what was that all about?" he asked. Clara laughed her natural laugh, then said, "I wanted to see what she was really like, to see if she was truly as clever and naive as my reports say she is. It seems she really is, but she knows how to do accounts, and her 2 ideas for using the press and souvenirs are actually very good. It's a shame about her brother Angus, though. I don't have the time to prove any links, but it's very odd that right after Angus banished her, she gets taken prisoner by pirates." Wyatt was still for a moment before saying, "You think her own brother arranged for her to be taken by pirates?" Clara shrugged. "Like I said, a strange coincidence, and perhaps very convenient for him. I shall let you go get some rest, Wyatt. You have been very busy these last few days. I thought you needed a good meal and maybe just a couple of drinks." Wyatt grinned. "I knew there was an ulterior motive for the dinner invitation, but thank you, Clara. It was very kind and delicious, though I have to say, the cooks in Newtown have been very resourceful. I have not had a bad meal, nor have I heard a single complaint about the food they serve. Given that the kitchen equipment is older than both of us put together, I find that remarkable. I shall leave you to your rest. I am going to go and see if Lupin Lusanto is still in engineering, as I have a question or two he might be able to help me with, and then, if he is still awake, I need to ask General Swallowtail, if perhaps he might have someone who knows how a biodiesel plant is supposed to be run. Good night, Clara. Good night, Cynthia." Clara and Cynthia both wished him good night as Wyatt left Clara's quarters. He then went towards engineering. He entered the elevator, and the operator asked him where to. Wyatt said, "I need to see the engineer-in-chief, Lupin Lusanto, in engineering." The young woman controlling the lift started it moving and then turned to Wyatt. "Begging your pardon, sir, but the chief engineer is in the fabrication plant. He rode in this very lift not 5 minutes ago." Wyatt turned to her just as the lift started to slow, saying, "I guess I need the fabrication plant then." The young woman said, "Yes, sir," as the doors opened to reveal the vast machinery of the fabrication plant rooms. Wyatt smiled and shook his head as he exited the lift. Everybody, it seemed, was being clever today. It did not take Wyatt long to spot the tall, lanky man with the red eyes. He approached, waiting for the man to finish whatever it was he was doing, and then turn around, saying, "Good evening, Lupin." As he did so, if Lupin were annoyed seeing Wyatt in his domain, he did not show it. "Good evening, Sir Wyatt," he replied. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Wyatt had not expected the cordial treatment from the chief engineer. The last time they had talked, it had been clear that the red-eyed man thought that making better accommodations for the pirate children and adolescents was an inconvenience he would prefer not to have to do. But to his credit, he had done an incredibly good job of turning a storeroom into a barracks. Wyatt said, Her Highness just suggested to me that it was possible you could fabricate some items for emergency aid on Hago, specifically some electrical generators. I have the specifications here, he said, showing Lupin the information on his datapad. Lupin looked at the serial numbers and specifications and then ran a search for available files. Turning to Wyatt, he said, I cannot give you these exact turbines, but I do have almost identical newer designs in the system, with slightly improved specifications that I could have constructed for you. Did Her Highness indicate the priority for this order? Wyatt replied, Her Highness did not, but I believe that essential repairs to the Noir Navio must take priority, and that these, although important, should follow that. Lupin looked at the young man in front of him. As the ship's chief engineer, he had heard the gossip concerning the newly promoted Lieutenant Commodore, but did not want to believe it without verifying the evidence for himself. So he had accessed the battle information and watched the easily available video of his solo attack on the gallant Venture. Lupin was no fool. Much as he was confident of his own abilities, he saw that Wyatt was unusually proficient at causing death and destruction. Wyatt had the authority with his new rank, combined with being Commander Redford's official second-in-command, to order Lupin to produce what he needed. With Princess Clara's authority, he could have demanded that Lupin drop everything and produce the items right now, but he had not. The command was there, but it was presented as a request rather than an order from the younger man. Lupin turned to Wyatt, consulting the schedule to see which machines would be needed for Wyatt's request and the amount of time required, and then adjusted the schedules to fit the work in before saying, The first turbine and the control circuits will be ready in just over 12 hours. The other turbines will take less time to produce. If that will be convenient, Wyatt. Now, is there anything else? The smile on Wyatt's face could have lit up the room if Lupin had paid any attention to such things. As Wyatt thanked him, he then paused briefly before asking, I was wondering, Lupin, what happens to all the material that is gathered up for us to recycle in the fabricators, if it is not inconvenient for me to ask? Lupin appeared to briefly consider the request and decided that it was something that he would deign to answer. It is very simple, he began. We send out collectors, mainly into areas with high concentrations of metals. They gather everything in the area like a mindless beast filling its stomach with everything in front of it. When it is full, it returns here, and the machinery sorts through it. Anything radioactive is placed in a shielded container, analyzed to ensure it's not a weapon, and then when we have a full container, we crush it into a block and fire it into the sun for safe disposal. Everything else is sorted into useful material, mainly metals and not useful. That is mainly plastics, ceramics, and odd bits of metal that are treated in a way that makes them incompatible with the machinery here, that likewise fills up a larger container and will eventually be crushed and disposed of. But why do you ask? Wyatt decided that he should be honest, saying, Actually, I want to create something for Lord Ishtunnel Ferentis, some sort of reminder from his time in a real battle. And well, I thought, what better than to use some piece of debris that he could place on a wall so he could say to his family and friends, See, I was there. Lupin laughed at that. I see you are learning, Wyatt. If you please, go ahead and see what you can find. Your request for the pirate barracks didn't convince me. Still, thanks to a couple of those children, 3 of my engineers are alive, so by all means take anything you want. Lupin opened a hatch into a large container. At the far end, a trickle of small parts was falling onto the floor. Here, there, a few larger lumps of debris lay poking up through the smaller parts. It only took Wyatt 3 minutes to find the perfect thing. A piece of a ceramic plate from a Drazen fighter, complete with some markings. He had no idea what they meant, if anything, but they looked alien, which was good enough for Wyatt. Before he left, he looked at the material on the floor of the container. It was mainly some sort of ceramic, shattered into lots of pieces. It had an odd luster to it. As he looked at it, he realized what he could see was the perfect thing to add to the wooden plaques, small no more than 4 centimeters across, and distinctly alien-looking. He exited the container and showed the larger piece to Lupin, asking, Can you tell me what this stuff is? Lupin looked at the item and said, It's some sort of ceramic from their propulsion system. It's incredibly hard and resistant to just about any heat we can throw at it. But when their ships blow up, this stuff shatters into thousands of tiny pieces. We can't process it in any way, so the machine just filters it out. Wyatt felt the weight in his hand. It seemed very light, so he said, Could I have it? Lupin shrugged. Sure, take as much of it as you want. To which Wyatt said, I'd like about 10 tons, maybe a tiny bit more, just loose if that's possible, please, Lupin. Lupin had no idea what Wyatt wanted so much rubbish for, but he couldn't see any harm in it. It was an odd request, but he was used to those. Okay, Wyatt, I'll set the container to not compact. There will be a few other things in there as well, but about 95% of the rubbish material is that stuff. Where do you want it? He asked, shaking his head at the absurd request. Wyatt said, in the hangar bay if that's possible? Lupin, trying very hard not to laugh, quickly worked out how long it would take to fill the container and said, it will be there by early afternoon tomorrow. Wyatt thanked him again and then took the lift up to the command level. He asked the acting comms officer to try and get through to General Swallowtail, and if he succeeded to route it to the war room. When the general came onto the screen in front of Wyatt, he did not look like the same man Wyatt had spoken to just 2 days previously.